أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Peace and blessings be upon you all, dear viewers. Welcome once again to Ahlul Bayt, the channel which broadcasts the pristine teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Peace and blessings be upon them all exclusively in the language of English. And on Revet's World this week we have another dear guest, Brother Glenn Moran. I nearly called you something else there. I must remember to pronounce that properly. Who has kindly joined us and as always will let us into his life, give us a window into his life so we can understand some of the battles that have taken place on his journey to becoming a Muslim so that we can all gain benefits from it, inshallah. And as always, we'd like to start from the beginning, so we're going through your life chronologically until the point where you came into the studio today. Okay. Yes, so are you white, Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon?
Yeah, British-Irish background.
Okay, so you just have a nice suntan.
Yeah, at the minute. It will soon fade out.
Good, good. And so where you from originally? I mean, whereabouts in the UK?
I spent my first few years in East London, in Beckton, and then sort of from about the age of 9, 10, I think it was, I moved to Milton Keynes, where I've been until the last couple of years, and I moved to Exeter.
For university,
yeah,
which
for university.
Obviously we will go into in a bit more detail later on. And in terms of your parents and just so that we can get an idea of the kind of ideological or theological background that you grew up with, or the influences that you were exposed to, were your parents religious? Would you call them Christians or?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, my dad, for instance, is very much a strong atheist from a quite left-leaning socialist background. So he's definitely 100% atheist. My mother, she used to. I would describe her as being sort of formerly a loose Christian, where she had belief. But from speaking to her recently, she's talked about that possibly fading. So I don't come from a religious background at all. I think one person in my family, which is my grandmother, was of any kind of religious faith.
Your grandmother was religious?
Well, she's still around. So she's she's probably the only person in my family that I would describe as being religious.
Okay.
She's a Protestant.
Okay.
And she always used to, before I became religious, because I wasn't raised in a particular faith. She used to always have a go at me when I said I didn't believe in God or whatever. So
really.
Yeah.
And what about? So is she your grandmother?
On my dad's side.
On your dad's side.
Yeah.
So did she have a go at her son? Your father?
I don't think they really discuss it, to be honest.
Right.
She's recognised that that's possibly a lost cause.
Sure. Okay. So he was, as you said, a clear-cut atheist.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I guess you were following in the footsteps of your father, or?
Largely, to me, I wasn't raised to a particular religion. I did kind of, so my kind of, any kind of education that I'd have on anything to do with religion, or even you talk in terms of creation, was mainly from school. That very dogmatic idea of the sort of evolution and this kind of thing. So it was very much teaching away and encouraging people, as I think often happens in the UK, away from religion. So that's pretty much the stage I was at. I wouldn't say it was particularly any opinions I had were from my family. It was more to do with just general society and the way we're educated at school. Okay.
And so would you, you called you explained, or you described your father as an atheist in the true sense of the word. What about yourself? Would you, looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, the thoughts that go through our mind as young, impressionable children, would you consider yourself to have been an atheist in the true sense of the word, or?
I would have certainly called myself an atheist.
If somebody had asked you?
Yeah, certain, but thinking back, I don't think that was ever particularly true. It's just, the idea of, for me, growing up with a lot of my friends, with the idea of saying things as I believe possibly in the idea of something else, would have been quite alien to them. So I would have definitely called myself an atheist, but I don't think that was ever true. I certainly never fully sort of bought into the idea that we just came about by some sort of act of chance, or we just appeared and the creation of the world was so random. and I never quite bought into that idea. For me, there was clearly something else was going on. There was a bigger picture, but it wasn't important enough to me to actually look into that and find out what is the truth. I was very apathetic to it.
Sure.
So I don't think I was a true atheist, but I certainly would have described myself as such.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is just the social norm and the influences that you were exposed to deemed it such that it wasn't really something that you would pay much attention to, even if you had really given it much thought.
I think I think it comes from the fact that if you're presented with something that doesn't quite make sense to you, but you're not really given a valid alternative. I mean, most people in this country, I guess their point of call would be Christianity, and the little I knew of that, it didn't quite make sense to me. So if you've got the choice of two things that don't quite fit to you, I mean, I think you do become kind of apathetic. Maybe like you might find this with voters in the UK who say that there's no alternative in the parties, and they just really get to the situation where they just don't really think about it that much.
Sure.
In many cases, I think that was probably the case for me.
Okay.
Growing up.
That's quite interesting because, I mean, I'm assuming that your interaction with Christianity was quite minimal at this point in time.
It was. I mean, we had sort of basic religious education at school. My mum, in a way, we used to have the small books of the Bible stories and stuff, but it wasn't really something that we were ever raised directly with. So sure. I had a kind of
an idea.
Yeah, my mum would often say when we were very young about God and stuff, and she would get very angry with us if we said we didn't believe in it. But at the same time, we weren't really raised to be religious. We never went to church. So my knowledge was limited, but I did have some kind of general understanding of Christianity.
Okay. Now, you said that you grew up in East London,
yes.
or up until, I think you said the age of 9?
About 9 or 10, I think.
9 or 10. And coming from that neck of the woods myself, I know that there's a very high percentage of Muslims who live in the area. So, again, I'm asking you to kind of look back many years ago. Did you, for example, have any Muslim friends? And if you did it have any effect on you? And when I say effect, not effect to the extent that obviously you're going to convert at the age of 9, but maybe something that would have added to the information you would pick up later on that maybe subconsciously had an effect.
I mean, certainly, quite a high percentage of my friends were Muslims when I was a child, mainly Pakistani, growing up in East London. I wouldn't say it had any real effect, obviously, religiously at that age, but I think it did. I think a lot of people in the UK, even before the recent situation with terrorism or September 11th or anything happened, had a kind of a negative image of Muslims a lot of the time. And I never really had that, because when I was a child, I used to spend most of my time playing with young Pakistani kids. So I never really considered sort of Muslims to be that kind of the alien other that I think some people have. So I think that coming in future, that would come back, where I wouldn't have that hostility that I think some people do have about Islam, with huge misconceptions about Muslims. I don't think I ever had that as such. So I think it definitely had an impact. And
in terms of, I mean, again, maybe I'm trying to look into this a bit too deeply, but in terms of, I don't know, for example, although arguably it's partly cultural as well, but maybe the family relations amongst that you would observe amongst these Muslim friends of yours, is this something that you remember, or not really? Not really something I remember. I mean, to be honest, a lot of these kids I just mixed with at school. Sure. I remember one of my friends, I quite often would walk past him and his brothers playing football, and I'd end up playing football with them, and it would just be a whole group of Pakistani guys and this one white kid, which would be me playing football with them. And I guess, looking back, they were probably, most of them, I think, if I recall rightly, were related, but I didn't really see too much family interaction with them. Sure. Okay. And what about you? So, bearing in mind what you've told us so far as to your kind of ideological beliefs growing up, is it right for me to assume that you kind of were just like every other person who was non-religious and did all of the things that non-religious people do? Definitely true. I used to be into nightclub DJing. When I grew up, music, alcohol, women, these kind of things were the norm for me, and this is what essentially I lived for. I was one of the people that would work in the week with the aim of going out and getting drunk at the weekend. Sure. Many times that would carry over into the week, and this is really all I knew, and this was, to me, what I should be doing to
looking to do. And I think in many ways our society encourages that kind of idea, that's how we are, and that's what we should be looking to aspire to.
Did you just out of curiosity, when you mentioned the alcohol part of your previous life, did you ever wake up some mornings with a very, very bad hangover and say that I really am going to stop drinking, I'm never going to drink again because of the way I feel right now?
Totally, so many times.
And then probably go out the same night and...
Well, for me, I mean, particularly in the last couple of years before I stopped drinking, it would be a case of I would wake up on a Saturday morning after being out on the Friday, feel so bad, the first thing I'd do was go open a bottle of wine just to try and get rid of the bad feeling I had, and then it would just turn into a whole weekend. But the amount of times I said I was going to stop drinking because I was that hungover, I mean, that's happened hundreds of times, I guess, in the past.
Sure. And also, do you think, I mean, this may not be the case with you, and you can confirm whether that's the case or not. When you mentioned, the women, for example, do you feel that you were gauging yourself, you were measuring yourself by whether or not you were able to attract or, etc., without going into any details, your relationships with the opposite sex, was this what gave you your self-worth?
In many ways, yeah, and not even just as much that. I mean, I think a lot of things when you live that kind of lifestyle are valued on the opposite sex. For instance, you measure a good night out. What do you measure a good night out? And it's normally you're successful with women. And I know for a lot of girls I grew up with, it's probably the same for guys. They're successful guys. But yeah, definitely. I mean, that was definitely something that would be in all aspects of society. You meet your friends down the pub and all you talk about is women. Everything was geared to that kind of women and football, I guess, were the two. But I would say that's definitely true, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that you grew up with a kind of atheist mentality.
Yeah.
What about later on in life? Was there ever any point in your life where you maybe decided to explore religions, be it Eastern religions or Christianity, prior to actually coming into contact with Islam or not?
Certainly with Christianity, yes. Other religions, no. I actually was in a relationship with a girl who came from a Catholic family, and I was actually living with them for a while. And I did sort of decide, I'm going to check out Catholicism and see what it's all about. I did approach it from probably a skeptical point of view. And I remember once I literally decided to pick up the Bible and start reading it, and I started from Genesis and worked my way through. And it was a situation where as I was reading, there was things I had a huge issue with, the creation story, some of the things in it, like the story of Lot and his daughters and these kind of things. But at the same time, and I used to find this as well, I used to be the kind of person who would enjoy sort of making fun of religious people. I was the real sort of smart guy who thinks he knows better than the religious people, and I would make fun of them in many cases and try and ridicule their beliefs. And in many ways, I had this problem though with Christianity, where even when I found the problem in the Bible, or I would try and debate with somebody who's a Christian, and I would be coming from a very cynical point of view, and I find problems with it, there was always, I really to this day I can't explain it, there was always something about it. I had this kind of sense of guilt for making fun of it, or for finding fault in it. Like I felt there was something in it that certainly had value or some aspect of truth. Although I certainly didn't believe that in all the Christian teaching or everything in the Bible. There was certainly something there I always...
So there was a connection of some sort there, you just maybe couldn't put your hands on exactly
there
what it was.
There was something there. I mean,
but you could also sense or see the flaws therein.
Yeah, I mean, to me that started as soon as I picked up the Bible and I got into Genesis, and you look at the creation of the world, and even to just the idea that God sits on the throne and rests on the seventh day. That was always an issue for me. Like I couldn't understand why God needed to sit down and take a rest. It didn't make any kind of theological sense to me, and I wasn't a deep thinker about it at the time. And this is just me picking it up as your everyday person and just finding this doesn't sound right to me.
And you mentioned the story of Prophet Lut as well.
Yeah, there's a story in I think it's in Genesis. I'm not sure. It might be in no, it would be in Genesis, where it sort of involves alcohol and incest and these kind of things. And I remember picking it up and reading this, and at the time I just thought this was a very strange inclusion in the book of God, you know, the Word of God. Why is God really getting into this kind of? So what's the message in this? Later on, actually, this would be quite ironic, because when I sort of found Islam and was talking about alcohol, and I would always, when talking to Christians, I would say, you know, the first time I've ever seen it mentioned in the Bible, this is clearly negative. You know, somebody's getting their father drunk and indulging in incest with them.
He's a prophet of God.
Exactly, so I mean, it gets to the point where it doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't fit in either two ways. It doesn't fit the fact that, you know, this is either a story that doesn't appear to fit in with what would be holy in the Word of God, or it's clearly a message. The only message I can see in it clearly is, don't mess around with alcohol.
Stay away.
And I think that message was clear to me. I mean, I only really came across that meaning of it later on when I started to
encounter Islam,
yeah.
of course. Sure. What about, very classic question, I'm sure you've been asked it many times before, what about the concept of Trinity? In those few examples of you going to the church, you must have, especially a Catholic church, you must have been exposed to the teachers of Trinity, which you would have been aware of beforehand anyway. What was the conclusion you came to from that?
I mean, I remember, I used to hear about the Trinity, but it was never really emphasized to me by Christians that much until I started attending a church. But the first time I went there, I remember thinking, why do they keep talking about Jesus? Why are they not talking about God? And I could never understand that. And it was through those questions that people decided to get into the Trinity with me. And I never quite understood it. And every time somebody's tried to explain it to me, even to this day, I've not been able to grasp the logic of it in any way. And every sort of analogy somebody's given to me, I've not been able to resolve that problem.
Sure.
I think this is one of the beauties, again, when I found Islam, is the fact that, you know, this is clearly teaching the opposite to the Trinity in quite clear logical sense, you know.
Sure. And what about the sermons, for example? I mean, were there anything in the sermons that were used to try and help you understand the concept of the Trinity, or was what was being said to you helping you to understand that the Trinity didn't make sense?
It was never really, I mean, in my experience of church, the Trinity wasn't really touched upon, which I thought was a bit odd. I mean, I encountered it more on the basis of saying to people, you know, why are you talking about Jesus and not God? And then they would get into it. But actually, the sermons, it's kind of, I'm of the honest opinion that they don't go into it for a reason, because they know it's going to create questions, and people are going to say, you know, hold on a second, what's the deal with this? In Catholic churches, the only one I can really talk about, it seemed to be kind of just, this is fact, so we just, you know, we'll just get on with it, and it wasn't really gone into it in any kind of...
And I remember you mentioning that one of the observations you made was that the priest in the church was called Father, and you had an issue with that.
Yeah, I remember one time I went and there was a reading that was done, and part of the reading was a scripture reading from the Bible, and it said clearly in the words, and it's from God speaking, "You shall call nobody Father but me," which I thought, okay. But then the priest is saying afterwards, of course he doesn't mean you can't call me Father. And I remember thinking to myself, how do you know that? You know, I don't see any kind of logic here. You know, you got the clear word of God saying one thing, and then somebody who's a member of the Catholic Church and the clergy saying the complete opposite, which to me was an instant sort of something I couldn't understand. This is one incident that always sticks out of my mind.
Sure. So. Okay. Brilliant. So I guess, are we to assume that the conclusion was, again, that you felt that there was something underlying in the message of Christianity, whether it's from the Old Testament that you had read, or from the experiences of going to the church and some of the sermons you'd heard, however, there were many issues that you had a problem with?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there was something there. It wasn't, I never found something in the Bible where I was sitting down and thought, wow, you know, this is amazing. But whenever I would find something wrong in it, I just felt like I shouldn't, like this, not like I shouldn't, but there was something right about it. And it was something of the heart, and I can't explain it. And in any other level, it wasn't logical, it wasn't spiritual. This was just something I felt within inside me.
Okay. Sure.
So that's where I was at with that.
Okay. So naturally, after a while, it kind of died its own death naturally, and you gravitated away from these church visitations that you had been undertaking. I just wanted to ask. Obviously, I know that there was a very influential Muslim person that you met who we're going to talk about in a minute. I just wanted to ask, prior to meeting him, what was the understanding? Because you would have had friends, okay, we spoke about you in East London, but maybe even in Milton Keynes, an assumption I would make is maybe you might have at least had, or at least encountered one or two Muslims.
Yeah.
What was the impression of Islam that you'd had up until this point? Was it positive or negative? You know, what type of Muslims were you encountering?
Mainly non-religious Muslims. Most of the Muslims I know were just, you know, they were mainly young Pakistani guys who, you know, they were probably culturally Muslim more than anything. I mean, they might be, you know, the guys who might go to the masjid on a Friday, but I certainly would have seen them in the nightclubs a lot of the time, which is unfortunate. But I really never had too many negative ideas about Islam. Obviously, I used to hear a lot of stuff, but to me, this was kind of contrary to some things that I remember being taught. I mean, we did kind of touch on Islam in religious education at school, although not in any depth, but I mean, a lot of the stuff. I mean, most of the stuff I heard negative about Islam was it was oppressive to women, for one, which I never quite understood. I mean, when most people used to talk about it, they used to sort of talk about hijab or something. And I remember thinking, well, most of the Muslim women I've ever encountered on a day-to-day basis don't seem that oppressed to me. In fact, many of them seem to run the family.
Very liberated is probably...
Exactly. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that I universally rejected that concept as people said it. I did think there must be something about Islam that has that for people to say about it.
Sure.
But I didn't really know that much about it to go into.
It's just that for some people, and maybe that isn't the case with you, for some people they draw their conclusions about Islam based on the interactions they have with Muslims. So if they see Muslims who are nightclubbers and drinkers, and God forbid even womanizers and so on and so forth, they then draw the conclusion that this is what Islam is.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case for you?
No, not at all. I mean, to be honest, I'd encountered lots of different religious people that I see acting in a certain way that I knew their religion was, you know, was anti.
So you were able to make the difference.
So I did know. I mean, I had that understanding that you can't judge religion on the people that follow it. Something that actually I noticed even more actually during interaction with Islam in many cases. But that was something I was aware of beforehand.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. And just before we go to break, when we come back, we can talk about this friend in a bit more detail.
Okay.
I wanted to focus on your first intense encounter with Islam, not just on a kind of superficial, insignificant level, but slightly more deeper. When did this first take place, and how did you get to meet this particular brother?
In 2004, my dad was always involved in the Palestinian issue, in Israel-Palestine, and he organised something called the Peace Cycle, which was a London to Jerusalem cycle ride, just to raise awareness and to try and raise some funds to support Palestinians. I went on this event, and naturally this is the kind of thing that would always attract a large Muslim sort of turnout. There was a group of Muslims I used to speak to on a regular basis, most of them from Pakistani backgrounds. But there was also one brother, which is the brother in question, who was Yemeni, and it was a 6-week event, and it was through the process of continually discussing Islam and actually spending every day with Muslims, not just one but several of them. It was also in this event I met the first revert I'd ever met, which was a bit of a strange experience for me. I'd never encountered that.
And revert, what, from the UK?
Yeah. So that was the first time I'd ever encountered the concept of somebody actually converting to Islam or reverting to Islam. I'd never encountered it before. So on this particular event, this is where I really came into a lot of contact with Islam and Muslims. Okay,
brilliant. Inshallah, when we come back after the break, we can talk about this brother in a bit more detail, and maybe just touch on one or two of the discussions you had with each other, and obviously what impact this had on your understanding of Islam and the steps that you took thereafter. So please don't go away. Join us after this short break, where we'll continue with the interesting story of the conversion or reversion of Brother Glenn Moran. Assalamu alaikum.